That will never work. You can't push that. Seriously? Don't. Oh my God, that's other things you can do. That's bad. You probably should find other hobbies. You ever learn how to talk? Stop. Be happy. You don't. Don't bother me. I've seen better. Do you really want to do that? And my third grade, get up. Welcome to Horrible Writing, the rawest, most candid, in-your-face writing show on the interwebs because none of us have time to suck. Let's do this. Welcome to Horrible Writing, episode 57. I'm Paul Sading. I'm your host, and with me this time is somebody who has literally changed my writing life, my writing career, my writing path. And it's an extreme honor to bring on not only an award-nominated author, but a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author, but on top of all that, the voice, the personality, the intellectual insight behind the creative pen. I have none other than Joanna Penn with me here on Horrible Writing. Joanna, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Paul, and thanks for that lovely introduction. That was just very sweet. Well, I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and like I told you before we recorded, you literally have put me on the fast track, and I've been creatively writing all my life, doing it publicly in audio drama form since 2015. But it was always the goal to publish books, and this year by the end of the year I'll have 3 out, and it would not have happened if it were not for everything that you give the community. So it's an absolute honor to bring you on here, especially about this. You and I did some chatting months ago in prep for the interview, and one of the things that I feel a connection with you on, but I also feel like you could teach me and a lot of other writers about, is drive and focus. Because when I watch what you do, it is, I wear people out. I've had people tell me that, Paul, you're exhausting. You have so much energy. How do you do it all? And then I look at you and you exhaust me because you produce so much and it's so high quality and it's so professional, everything. How do you do this, Joanna? How is this who Joanna Penn is and has always been? Is this driven, highly focused person, or did you develop that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think I always have been kind of that type A personality. I've always been a goal setter. I've always liked having sort of concrete things to achieve. But as with many people, I kind of, as I say, put my ladder against the wrong wall for many years. So I spent 13 years implementing accounts payable into large corporates, which always sounds so exciting. And, I did really, I was a business consultant. I made good money. I worked for sort of big name companies, all the things that I had a house and an investment property, and we had all the things you're meant to have by the time you're in your 30s, and the world goes, yes, you are a good citizen, you do all the right things, for somebody like you, and then but I just felt so empty and just was like, what is the point? Like, seriously, what is the point in all this? And so what's so funny is then we sold everything. We downsized completely. I ditched my job, and started again. So I think, yes, I'm very driven, but sometimes being driven for the wrong things doesn't serve you. And then I guess the reason I'm so driven now is that I feel like my ladder is against the right wall. And so for me, when I wrote that first book back in like 2016, between 2016 and 2018, when that book came out, and I held my first book in my hand, and I was like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. I'm meant to be writing stuff and putting new stuff in the world. And of course, new stuff also means podcasting. I think you can have a body of work through your voice, as you do. And also, so I think for me, the drive comes from, I've actually found what I want to do with my life. And this is a big tip for people listening. Like, I think whether or not you want to do this. And then if you know that this is what you want to do, then you have to make time for it. And it became for me a real drive to get out of my job and spend my life doing something I wanted to do. And now my drive is to make sure I can continue doing this. So that's what drives me every day, is like, okay, how can I protect what I have. I've been a full-time writer now since 2011, so just past 7 years full-time, and I'm determined to do this full-time for the rest of my life. So what drives me now is the kind of creating more, but also making a life that I want to live every day, and making decisions that enable that to happen, and also helping other people, obviously, like the listeners and yourself. So I guess if people are not feeling driven enough, then I would just say perhaps you haven't decided what you really want and what you're willing to give to get there.
You led me right into what I was chomping at the bit to ask you this next question, and you kind of hinted at it right there. And I know I have my opinion, and I'm very opinionated, and I love helping people, or I wouldn't do the type of podcast that this is. But one of the things that frustrates me about some folks in the community is that I don't know what it is, Joanna, but they spend so much time talking about this, and you can see in the comments that they really want to do this. But for example, the other day I did a poll with some fans, and I asked, or some fans and listeners of the show, and I asked what their current biggest writing struggle is. Mine, ironically enough, is focus. I'm working on too many things that are interfering with each other right now. And to a person, everyone who responded said time, finding the time. So that was going to be my next question to you is, was this something you deliberately, consciously worked on and developed? Or is this, do you feel, is this something inherent to the person that we're born with this drive, and it's either there or it's not?
Oh, no, you can definitely learn to find what your process is. Everyone has a different time kind of clock in their body, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to be type A and like I have to achieve everything, because like my husband is type B, which there is actually a type B, which is someone who is more process driven than goal driven. So his process is to write every day for he does his Pomodoro 20 minutes or whatever. And I don't write every day. I'm kind of project driven. So it doesn't matter what your kind of personality type is in that way, but you do have to make time. So, and whatever type of personality you are, it doesn't matter, but you have to put it in somewhere. So when I just to be clear, between 2006, when I started, when I decided to write and publish a book, to 2011 when I left my job. So that's 5 years I worked building up my books. By the time I left, I had 5 books, I think, and I built my website for 3 years and had the podcast and all of that. So I was doing all of this on the side. And because I'm a morning person, I would get up at 5 and I would write my first draft material before going to work, because I had quite a demanding job. So once I got to work, I knew I was over for the day, basically. Mm-hmm. And then I would do my work. But that's about when smartphones arrived, and I started connecting with people on Twitter, and then in the evenings I would do my podcast, because the time zone I was living in Australia worked quite well with Americans. And then so I did that. So I did my first draft material before work, and then at the weekends I also worked weekends. And then about 2 years later I went to 4 days a week. So I decided that it was worth giving up 20% of my income to get another day. Mm-hmm. So, and that's quite a big deal. I realized some people with, at the time I did have a mortgage, and you have to kind of weigh up how to find that. But I was like, I know that I am getting out of this job. So I really changed that up. But the point is, if how you find your time is up to you, but inevitably you're going to have to give something else up. Mm-hmm. So, and for me, it wasn't really sleep, because I just went to bed earlier. So I would go to bed at like 9 o'clock in the evening so I could get up at 5, because I love my sleep. But some people, maybe it's a hobby. At the time we gave up TV, and that was in the era before Netflix. So I know it's much harder now. But you have to think like, do you have to give up a hobby? Do you have to give up some social life? Do you have to give up another something, because everyone's already filled their time. No one's got enough time.
Right.
You just have to decide what fills it, and then you have to schedule it. So I use Google Calendar, and I schedule my time, and I turn up on time at the cafe where I write, and I do my time, and then I leave. So you have to treat it seriously, like you would any other professional appointment, if you want to achieve anything.
Mm-hmm.
And just to back on your problem with your too many projects,
Yes.
This is also a big issue. Okay, and all I can say is just stop that. You have to decide on the project you need to finish. Now, of course, most people have multiple things going on, but for me, like that, if you're writing, you can write one novel and one nonfiction book, for example, or you could be writing one novel and recording something, because you do a lot of recording, right?
Correct.
So, but I really think you would struggle to work on more than one novel at the same time and actually achieve something. So what are you struggling with that?
Well, and that's the thing is with the audio dramas, right? They're almost like television shows for your ears. So people expect seasons and they expect things at certain increments, whatever that may be, whatever you've established. But to get to those and get them produced at that level, you obviously have to give yourself lead time. So currently, I'm trying to edit a completed manuscript horror novel, and I've got this tug of this upcoming audio drama I have to get done if I want to stay on that fan expectation of release, while also trying to tidy up an audiobook for a nonfiction book I wrote. So and of course, like all of us, I've got this idea tugging on me that I have no energy for. So I'm in this cycle of busy stuff with the attractive pull of the creative thing. Hey, this shiny new idea over here really needs to get developed. Oh my gosh, I feel exhausted because of all the busy stuff. I can't even tap into the creative stuff, which obviously impacts the way I'm editing this horror book, because the creativity feels like it's asking me to give it a break. You know what I mean? It's tapping out because of all of this stuff. And it ties into months ago. You and I have been trying to get to do this interview for a while. There were some technical issues that I had on my end that kind of prevented it. But at the time of when we were chatting the first time, you made a comment on your show on the Creative Pen about don't be like me, which was an eye-opening moment for me, because I was trying to be like you. I was watching what you were doing and thought, she has her stuff together. This is what I need to aim for. And then I was doing a yard project, listening to you in my earbuds, and you said, I'm giving up this, I'm giving up this, I'm going to focus on this, don't be like me. And which made me, obviously want to talk to you about focus and how you manage that. What happened in that transition? It's not that I felt betrayed or anything. It was just, I really respect what you've done, and I know others do. So when you say, hey, don't be like me in terms of focus, something had to happen. In that, there's got to be a life lesson for the rest of us.
Oh yeah, well I think I mean I was doing too much. I'd taken on a third pen name. I was co-writing with my mum, doing sweet romance, which is not even a genre I'm into. It was just I was trying to help her. I'd also taken on screenwriting, so I was trying to adapt my novels into screenplays, and both of those things, and also speaking. So those three things. So professional speaking is something that I've done for 10 years now, and so those three things have gone. And they are kind of extra things away from my core. And my core is my podcast, The Creative Pen, helping authors. And I can help authors through my podcast. And my nonfiction books, but also my fiction. So my fiction as JF Penn, and then how I can serve my fiction is more important than trying to, for example, it's not serving my fiction to adapt my books into screenplays right now. And I guess we all learn things and we all change along the way. And I mean, I really enjoyed writing a screenplay, but the return on that investment, it's like a whole nother career, screenwriting. It takes a lot of networking. It takes a lot. And speaking also is a whole nother career. And so as you're going to hear when you listen to some of my latest shows, I'm adding in some new stuff for 2019, but in order to support my fiction under JF Penn. So what I would say is, and I'm full-time, this is a really important thing to people listening. This is my full-time job. So it's not the same as most people who have a day job and then write as well, where the writing doesn't have to pay. For me, I do, this does pay the bills. My husband works in the business as well. So, we have to do it in that way. So when I say don't be like me, it's more that just really try and pare it down to what's the most important. Like I said about putting your ladder against a different wall. I was like, do I want to put my ladder against a screenwriting wall? And I thought I did. And then I really thought about it and went, do you know what? Because it takes a lot of networking in the same way that speaking is. And I'm just an introvert. It's so tiring. So literally it was, I do not want to network. And also I know I don't want to work as a screenwriter. I interviewed a screenwriter. This is a good tip, actually, since you have a podcast. If you think you want to do something, interview someone who is doing that themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed a couple of screenwriters, a guy called David Nichols, who's very well known in Britain. And I was like, okay, I don't want to do that job. And that really helped me kind of take that off the list. And then I talked to my mom about Penny Appleton, and she's been on the podcast, and we had a really good chat. And then I was like, yeah, okay, I can take that off the list. So I think maybe you need to do the same, and maybe people listening, think about the ladder that you want to climb for the next 50 years. And how is what you're doing going to serve you climbing that ladder?
Shakay's hand was on the door, ready to pull it open when he heard the scream again. It definitely came from inside the building, and it was definitely a voice. Not chemicals, not a weird death call from some inanimate building material. This howl filled the world, reverberated inside his head. A human howl. A howl of excruciating pain. Get in, man, or I'm leaving you here. There was no mistaking DeMarco's intentions. Whatever was happening inside that building, DeMarco would leave it to carve out its own fate. Through the open doorway that was now ablaze with a roaring fire, something moved. It wasn't the musty drapes catching fire and breaking loose of the rods, drifting into his field of vision. It wasn't a partial wall collapsing, sending support beams scattering across the open maw. Something walked toward the door. Get in, man! DeMarco's voice was muffled in Shakay's ears. A form, a human form, stumbled through the fire, out of the fire, toward the front door. Neither male nor female, the form was immense, and it was on fire. The excerpt you just heard is from my upcoming horror anthology called 12 Deaths of Christmas, from the story Roasting on an Open Fire. 12 Deaths of Christmas is available for pre-order in digital form now, and you will be able to order your print copy on November 19th. Head over to Amazon, search for Pulsating or for 12 Deaths of Christmas to get your copy today. And if you take a screenshot of your purchase receipt with private information redacted and send it to me at pulsatingproductions@gmail.com or tweet at me at pulsating on Twitter, I will enter you into the drawing to give away my author-proof copy of the book where I made personal notes about each of the stories in there. Only one winner. You will get the only copy of that author-proof. It kind of gives you some insight into my thinking behind the story. Again, email me that copy at pulsatingproductions@gmail.com or tweet at me at pulsating on Twitter. 12 wicked tales of horror, just in time for the holiday season. And I was going to ask you right away, what would be your recommendations for that person who's sitting in the middle of, I don't know, Idaho, and they don't have a podcast, and they, they're ready to publish that first book. They have no audience. It's all overwhelming. How do you get found, right? There's a lot of us do these things because we're trying to understand that the reality of the market, and we don't want to make Amazon even richer than it is by pumping thousands into Amazon ads. We're trying to do it organically, so that would sometimes necessitate some of these things that kind of take us off focus, i.e. I'm raising my hand in guilty admission right here. So for that newer writer, how do they, what are some of your recommendations besides the ladder on the wall? I mean, do you, like tactically, when you were a brand new author, did you come out and develop a business plan and a 5-year vision and all those things? Or are there other things that you use that helped you stay focused, even if it was, a few months ago when you gave up all these things?
Uh, that's quite a big question. But I mean, when I started, so you think about the world in 2006, 2007, there was no iPhone. If people can remember that, there was no smartphones, there was no Kindle. There weren't ebooks, were PDFs that you could download from people's websites that were usually $97 or $297.
Wow.
There was no podcasts, so it was the very early days of podcasting. There was no digital streaming music. Or it was the very early days of the iPod at that point, before the iPhone. There certainly were no digital streaming audiobooks. There was no Kindle Unlimited. There was no Kobo. I mean, this is the thing. You can't compare where I was at the beginning of my career with starting now. You just can't. And equally, where if you're starting now, there's what you have to think is how different is it going to be in another 10 years. So I know you haven't listened to the show that I put out today, but I'm actually starting to talk about is the future audio first? Is the future voice first? And this is fascinating to me. Will it be in 10 years' time that voice trumps ebooks? Sorry, I hate to use the word Trump, but we have to sometimes. But basically, will voice first, will digital audiobooks or whatever we call them in 10 years, will they be the thing? Will it be VR or AR or whatever? So I really urge people starting now to get over the myth that the first book you put out is going to make thousands or millions of dollars and you'll be able to quit your job and you'll be, everything will be sorted. That is just not how it happens for 99.99999% of authors. And in fact, even the ones you think that it happens to, like the debut authors who make millions, usually they've written a ton of other books, and this was their 10th book or something that finally got published. Or I know a lot of debut authors, in inverted commas, who actually are starting again with another pen name. So they're not debuts, they're just starting again. This is a common publishing trick that I think is disingenuous, but there you go. So what you have to, that's why this ladder idea is so important. So if you're sitting there and you're going, oh goodness, this is such a big thing to think about, well, finish the book. Like if you finish one book, whether or not you publish, whether or not it sells anything, if you can actually finish a book, then that is a really big milestone, because most people who start a book don't finish a book.
Right.
Like that's just true. So if you finish a book, then awesome, like brilliant. Then the second question is, did you enjoy it enough to want to do it again? Because however you publish, whether you're an indie or whether you're traditional, you have to now write another book. So the question is, do you enjoy the process? Are you enjoying the journey? Because that's the most important thing. Because why would you want to do this unless you are living a life that you love? And that's, I love the life of creation, but it's not easy. In terms of, I think the discussion of book marketing strategy is a very different conversation to the one we've started. And I wouldn't want to just glibly say, do this, because there are no rules, and the rules are changing all the time. For example, I never thought that I would do podcasting. I got into it because I wanted to learn from people, and I was very isolated in Australia and didn't know any authors. So I thought, I'll do a podcast and I can actually talk to some people and maybe make a friend. And then, 10 years later, I'm still podcasting, but that wasn't something I thought I'd do. I have done video, but I really don't like it. So I'm going to pull back from video. I tried speaking because I started out in nonfiction. Nonfiction is a very good way to sell, speaking is a good way to sell nonfiction and other products. Ads and stuff to me are very short-lived. They are and a money pit. Everyone's like, ads are the way to sell books. It's like, yeah, but it's only happened in the last couple of years.
Right.
Most authors have never done this. So beware of the latest thing and consider the long-term view of what will actually sustain you for a long time.
And I think that helps with the, trying to pry into your head to see how you have this focus that you have. So with your recent transformation then, what did you learn from that is in terms of not allowing your drive to override this focus? You need to focus on XYZ. And I kind of feel, and I may be assigning some of my own values to it, but when you were doing all of that, I thought maybe her aim is, this bigger media presence, a broader media presence to be able to, you're casting a wider net type of thing to funnel everybody back towards whatever your brand goal was. But of course, obviously, that spread your focus too thin. So for anybody, obviously, we're not all shooting at that level yet. Hopefully, all of you will be in your own time. But Joanna, so what would you say to help people stop their drive from overriding that focus on that thing the wall that they've got the ladder against?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to take you up another level, and I've just written down here freedom. There's an exercise that Tony Robbins does, the self-help guru Tony Robbins, and he, talks very much about identifying your values. And my number one value is freedom, which is probably why I'm an independent author and so passionate about publishing wide and all these different things. But it came down to freedom because when I hit a kind of overwhelm earlier in the year, I was like, I don't feel like I have freedom right now. What's going on? And then I was like, okay, I'm trying to do all these different things, and that's not. They don't serve my goal of freedom. So, for example, one thing that's made a big difference around the freedom idea is we have Curl Up Press, we have a publishing imprint, me and my husband. Now, a lot of people want us to publish them. And I'm like, no, we don't do that. My goal is freedom. I don't want to publish other people. I don't want employees. I don't want a physical office. I don't want physical stock. We need to be able to run our business from a laptop, which is what we do. So freedom is like a fundamental top level value that sits over my decisions. And every now, and now I've kind of set a reminder on my on my to-do list, which is, am I still aiming for freedom? And it's very interesting to kind of think about that. So that's why I don't like being dependent on Amazon, for example, completely for book sales. It's why I don't like depending on book sales for my entire income. Stuff like that is how do I protect that value? So for some other people, it might be, your kids are your number one value, like doing the best for your kids. So maybe that means you want to be at home more for your kids, in which case, how can you make so you wouldn't become a speaker? Because generally, if you're a successful speaker, you're going around the world speaking, and you'd be away from home all the time. So there are lots of different things that you have to make decisions about that will define what you do. So for me, it wasn't that I was going in the wrong direction. It's just I had added some things. So Penny Appleton that I did with my mum, we did 3 books. I did that to help my mum. I did not start that brand myself for me. I started that to help my family. And my mum is now off writing her books herself. And I helped her to the point where she was able to do it herself. And I have absolutely no regrets about that. But I got to the point of editing the 4th book and just going, do you know what? This is not me. This is not freedom. This is not freedom to write what I want to write. So that's the thing for people. Like, the tip is identify what your core values are and how the decisions you make fit into that over time.
I love that. Be true to yourself, your goals, but be flexible as well over time. Be forgiving too to yourself. It makes a lot of sense. As you were talking about that, I was putting myself in a similar place where I was doing other things to help, especially in audio drama, to help newer audio dramatists. But what I was finding was, like you were saying, not necessarily that freedom is my macro level goal, but at the same time, I don't want to be chained to things, and I was becoming chained, and it was affecting everything else I did. So I absolutely love that you mentioned that. Is that what helps you, keeping that in mind, that freedom, that mantra of freedom, maybe even posted over your door behind your computer monitor? Does that help you sustain your drive, or are there other things that you deliberately put in place to make sure that you give yourself that sustainability?
There's the healthy side. So I have the healthy writer, obviously, which is about physical health and something that I found necessary to focus on. Probably not taking enough time to look after myself physically. So I do find that going to, moving is very important. So I do regular yoga practice now. I've been doing that for a couple of years, and I find that helps a lot. It incorporates a form of meditation, but also physical movement is really important in sustainability over the long term. But also, I'd say, like, I seriously love what I do. And at those times when I was like, I'm not enjoying this, Jonathan, my husband, said to me, so why are you doing it? Because this is our business. So
Yeah.
you don't have to do it. In the same way, like speaking, I've just come back from America, and speaking is it's invigorating in many ways, but it just wrecks me completely because I'm an introvert, and I struggle with it very much. And it's like, do the positive sides outweigh the negative impact on things? And I'm still weighing that up. I'm like 99% done with speaking, but I still like, oh, that would be awesome to go do that. And so I don't know. I go back and forwards on that, but certainly it will be very rarely. But this is the thing. It to me, it really comes down to, do you love what you do? And
Mm-hmm.
I love what I do in terms of writing books. I love my podcast. I love my podcast audience. I feel like I can be helpful. So that's the true north, I guess, is, do you feel like this is what you love doing? Otherwise, just go do something else.
Well, and maybe it's, and maybe it is me overcomplicating it too. I wouldn't put that past me. I can do that from time to time, but finding the true north, I love that. I think I'm gonna meme you on that, Joanna. So don't be surprised if you see
Okay.
a meme floating around Twitter someplace attributed to you, because I think that's what helps us a lot when we talk about time, and especially with the newer writers. I just see folks. Obviously, this show is targeted more towards folks just starting their journey or trying to refresh themselves to get back in touch with that first love of writing, because life distracted them and they miss it. So that typically is who listens to this show. And I think advice like that is the truly helpful advice to keep us
Mm.
focused on those things. Because again, when we look at people like you are so accessible, you're so approachable, but yet your presence, if you will, what we see and what we feel out there, it can be intimidating. So those of us who want to be like Joanna Penn have to be careful about how we do that. So horrible
Yeah.
writing listeners, I really am urging you to listen to what she has shared throughout this, because I see a lot of folks throw in the towel on this because I don't think we're fair to ourselves, Joanna.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I have actually put up on my site, at thecreativepen.com/timeline, I've put a whole load of blog posts starting with sort of way back, when I did my first novel, and so that people can see the development. I was talking to someone about Picasso the other day. Picasso, when he died, was worth $500 million, which, when he did die, was worth a lot more than it is now.
Right.
And he had over 50,000 pieces of art in his lifetime. Picasso did.
Wow.
And what's so interesting, if you go to the Picasso Museum, for example, in Malaga, you can see his work from when he started. And now, of course, everyone thinks in their head, they think Guernica, or they think the
Mm-hmm.
famous paintings. But the fact is, you can see the development of the artist through his work, that's out there. And I think this is one of the issues with the writing world, is that, you see people who are fully formed, and, the people, again, the debut authors are like, oh, wow, they're amazing. And yet they've probably been writing for 10 years.
Right.
And so this is the truth. You have to you can't look at where I am now, I can't look at Stephen King and go, why aren't I like that?
Right.
You have to go back to the beginning. And as I just said, when I started, there was none of this. Like, you guys, this is the best time ever, and it keeps getting better. Like every week, it's like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. This is phenomenal. I mean, even what you and I are doing now, this was not available
Right.
in 2006. There was no Skype. Oh, I don't think there was. So this is the thing. What I would also say is you have to want the verb. You have to want writing. Writing has to be the thing, not the noun,
Yes.
writer. You have to say, I am writing, not I want to be a writer. So I think that would be the other thing. Focus on the verb, not the noun.
Oh, I love that. I love that. All right. So listeners, if this is your first episode of Horrible Writing and you're following Joanna because you love hearing her speak, I do too. You can imagine why I'm so excited to have her here. But you might not know that we have a special segment on this show, and I'm about to ask Joanna about this. It's called, I'm going to ask Joanna, essentially, for a horrible writing experience. Now, you may think that's a terrible thing for a host to do. Why would you ask somebody that? I feel that the learning objective is true, and I think it's very helpful to people. I believe when we bring folks on like Joanna and we ask them for a quote-unquote horrible writing experience, and they share that, we also see where she is now. So we're having that flashback scene in her story, knowing where she is to this day. And that can be encouraging, empowering. It can be earth-moving for some of us, as I've shared with Joanna on and off air. So Joanna, with that being said, what is your horrible writing experience?
So I think mine was really sort of back in the day when I used to be a business consultant, and I used to write technical specifications as part of my job, a huge part of my job, writing technical specifications. So I would just, churn out these documents that would go to developers to create, technical programs. I mean, seriously, I would just sit there and write these things. So for me, the horrible writing was being forced, or obviously I chose to work that job, but many of us get trapped into jobs we didn't think we would ever do.
Right.
It was writing things I didn't want to write, and that kind of comes through to what we're saying about freedom. To me, the freedom now that I have is to write, especially as an independent author. I write the books I want to write, the books I love. And that's probably why I had that issue with Penny Appleton, because I was ending up writing things I didn't want to write. And so this is a really big deal, and why, beware of writing in a niche that you think is, hot, that you don't care about. I think that's really a big deal. So yeah, write what you love and don't feel guilty about it.
And that, yeah, I'm with you too. I've talked to some folks about doing collaborative stuff that would take me into like a dystopic sci-fi. And though I can watch those movies, I don't really read dystopic sci-fis. So I had, my own little awareness moment of thanks, but no thanks. So yeah, definitely agree with that. Follow that which energizes you. So Joanna, at this point, you've shared so much that has helped other people. Let us help you now. What in the world can we find from Joanna Penn out there, and maybe what can we expect from her in the future? Both Joanna Penn and obviously JF Penn. By the way, listeners, I've gotten into two of her not her fictions. Joanna knows I've read all her nonfiction before, but recently I've gotten into her. First started out with Map of Shadows, and then Stone of Fire is what I'm currently working my way through now. So what do you do, Joanna, and what can we expect from you in the future?
Sure. So for writers, come on over to thecreativepenn.com, pen with a double N, and there's my podcast. I also have books and courses for authors, trying to help people with the journey. There's also lots of free email lists, and there should be pretty much everything you need now on the Creative Penn, because it's coming up to 10 years old. So I pretty much have everything. The podcast is heading for 400 episodes. So I mean, it's kind of crazy. And I still got more to come. And then JF Penn is at jfpenn.com. And I've just put out book 10. Well, I haven't put it out. It's on pre-order right now as we talk. Valley of Dry Bones, which is the 10th book in my Arcane series. And I have a sort of detective series with supernatural edge. And Map of Shadows is my in the dark fantasy kind of area. So I write all over the shop.
Now,
and that's what I love.
Will you admit that those of you who don't know her, she's said this publicly, so it's sort of a rhetorical question. But are you ready to admit now that you may actually be, at least in part, a horror writer as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because I've been very much reading a lot of horror, and I just think I'm a cross genre writer. I think my books have elements
Hmm.
of thriller, dark fantasy, and obviously dark fantasy sits under horror pretty much. But things with demons in. But definitely all my books have a supernatural edge. Yeah, so it's really difficult because my arcane thrillers are action adventure thrillers with an edge of the supernatural. So basically, embrace being cross genre. That's completely fine.
And that's one of the beauties of, like you were saying, how when you were telling listeners to, kind of be excited about being alive in this age and being able to do this. Now, I'm old enough to remember, I'm in my 40s. I remember a publishing world that I dreamed of joining one day where you didn't do that. And if you did try to cross over to a different genre, you better change your name if you were going to try to do it. And now we can look at you for an example, but it's there at our feet to be doing. And that's so exciting for me as a creative.
Exactly. And I think, how can you have a career that spans a lifetime unless you're writing different things? I mean, I look at the most prolific authors: Stephen King, Nora Roberts, James Patterson. All of them write in multiple genres. In fact, Nora Roberts is an interesting one. Her book Year Zero, or it might be Year One, I can never remember. It's like a post-apocalyptic supernatural thriller with like fairies in. I mean, it's totally not what you'd expect from Nora Roberts.
Right.
And Stephen King, known as a horror writer, and yet he writes in so many subgenres. It's crazy. So this is the thing. Just look at the long term, and love writing.
Joanna, you have been so giving and so amazing. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everything that you do for the community and for coming back onto the show after we had that little technical blip. It just says a lot about your character, and I'm just absolutely honored to have you on and have you give so much of your time, not only obviously here, but what you do constantly. From, seriously, at least from the horrible writing community who was all geeked about me talking to you today when I told them yesterday. I just want to thank you for everything that you do. You really do change lives, and I feel compelled to actually communicate that with you openly so that you hear that, just in case you ever have one of those bad days where you're not sure if what you're doing is worth it. You are. So thank you for everything.
Oh, thanks so much, Paul. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
This has been Horrible Writing, and hopefully after this episode, you suck less than you did at the beginning. I am Paul Sading, your host extraordinaire. You can find me over on the Twitterverse at Writing Horrible and over at paulsading.com/horrible-writing. Until next time, suck less.